Joining me now, two Democratic strategists. Elena Beverly, she was the South Carolina Deputy Political Director for President Obama's 2008 campaign, and Don Calloway, CEO of Pine Street Strategies. Okay, with a welcome to you both, and this question goes to both of you. Who got the bigger endorsement there, Senator Harris for Biden or Reverend Jackson for Sanders? Elena, ladies first.
All right, well, so obviously Sanders is trying to mitigate the strength of the Kamala Harris endorsement by rolling out Reverend Jessie Jackson. He is a civil rights giant. He is legendary in the civil rights community. He is also providing the reach into the more senior saint members of the African-American community, and that is the community that Bernie Sanders trails with. So if you think about the Super Tuesday states where Joe Biden won 72% of the vote of that black vote in Alabama, or 62% of the black vote in North Carolina, or 60% of the black vote in Texas, Bernie Sanders has an issue with reaching into the more senior African-American community,
so then, Elena,
and that's what Jessie Jackson's there for.
So why do you think Jessie Jackson didn't, even the Saturday before Super Tuesday, in South Carolina, why do you think he didn't put his endorsement there at that point? Might that have helped?
Well, very good question, Alex. And I know Reverend Jackson well. He's been very, very good to me in my own civil rights community. But I also know that he doesn't do anything without a strategy to it. And so I believe he's said that Bernie Sanders has committed to him to have a constitutional, or fight for a constitutional right to vote, to fight for $50 billion for HBCUs, to fight for an African-American woman on the Supreme Court. My hope and my thinking is that he probably got some important concessions from the Sanders campaign.
Okay. Don, weigh in on that same question. Who got the bigger bounce, if you will, potentially from these endorsements?
You know, it's very difficult to say, and I don't know that it's entirely the right way to look at it is to compare the two. I think that both of them are fundamentally huge. Kamala Harris, one of the few black women to ever sit in the United States Senate. I would question timing-wise why she didn't do it in advance of the California primary, where one would believe her voice would have the most efficacy. I would also question why Jessie Jackson didn't do it in front of the South's primary, which happened on Super Tuesday, where he certainly would have had the biggest sway with the biggest amount of voters, as Elena said, senior African Americans. But, you know, Jessie Jackson, there's no real way to overstate the impact of his endorsement. Jessie Jackson has done more for black folks in his sleep than people my age and younger will ever do in our lifetime. So that is an incredibly big endorsement. I have to imagine that it will come with a substantial amount of work from Jessie and his organizers in the coming weeks. But, you know, I think that they are both just really, really big statements. I don't know that one is bigger than the other.
Yeah, no, I think you make a really good point. So let me ask you, Elena, you heard Mike Memoli, and I know you remember that debate where really toe-to-toe, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Obviously now things have simmered between them. Do you think we are looking at a potential, if Joe Biden gets the nomination, first and second ticket there? Do you think Kamala Harris is a likely, or at least a hardcore consideration?
I certainly hope so. I think that she represents an incredibly important voice right now. In part response to your previous question about why not earlier, why didn't she endorse earlier? I think she has an incredible amount of influence now, being the lone woman who could be one of the few women who are still in the race in some capacity, even through the endorsement. We saw woman after woman exiting the race, and now she provides an important voice for women on the electoral stage. Also, she has the incredible support of Michigan's Congressional Black Caucus, so she has an important voice as well in the state of Michigan. But I don't know, and I don't know about you, Don Calloway, but my Twitter feed was trending hashtag Biden-Harris 2020. So I think that there's real interest in having either a woman on the ticket or, more specifically, Harris on the ticket.
What do you think, Don, about what she's saying there about the effect of her on the ticket potentially?
Kamala's a big deal. She commands a huge constituency. She only increased her profile by running a very, very effective, if not winning, presidential campaign. But listen, there are 24 folks who didn't win, right? So she did not diminish herself in the eyes of America by any standing with this presidential campaign. You know, ultimately, I think that there is something that we can celebrate on this Sunday. There is a very real fervor in the Democratic Party to have a woman of color as the vice presidential nominee. I would be shocked if Joe Biden didn't have have Kamala Harris at the top of a very, very short list. In fact, it will be political malpractice given the weight that she brings to public affairs. It will be political malpractice to not consider her. But I'm hearing some great names. I hear Val Demings took a boost this week, if you will. Stacey Abrams has been a name that's been consistently thrown out there.
And we know they've met.
That they have met. There's a number of really, really good choices, and whether or not she would admit it, I'm sure that Senator Harris would covet that spot.
Let me ask you this, Elena, since you suggested that the delay in Reverend Jackson endorsing Bernie Sanders may have come because he waited to get some assurances, right? Do you think it's at all possible that Kamala Harris waited and got an assurance about something as big as Veep, or at least that she would be seriously considered before endorsing? Is that possible, the timing where we are in this race?
Certainly it's possible, but actually I don't think it would have been necessary, because when she exited the race in December, Joe Biden said that she would make an excellent vice presidential pick, that she would make an excellent cabinet member, maybe AG, or she would make an excellent Supreme Court justice. So I think that she was being looked at and on a short list of exceptional women for a very high office and potentially the executive, without requiring some sort of quid pro quo for her endorsement.
Yeah. Hey, John, let me ask you about what Bernie Sanders said today earlier on the Sunday morning talk shows. He said that the Democratic establishment was behind pushing both Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar out of the race.
Yeah. Yeah.
To make way for other candidates. In fact, he even went so far as to say that he suspects they would have won in Minnesota, one in Maine, one in Massachusetts, if the turnout would have been a little bit different. What are your thoughts on that? Is he making a valid point, or is it merely aspirational?
He's not making a valid point. You know, I would issue a stern warning to Bernie Sanders and his camp, and particularly his messengers. Everybody who is not on Team Bernie is not, quote unquote, the establishment. And that's what's gotten him in trouble messaging-wise over the last 2 weeks, is that if you don't agree with me, you're somehow the establishment. Well, millions of black folks throughout the United States South, and particularly the Southeast, are not establishment. What they are is particularly pragmatic voters who have lived a lifetime of politicians making promises to them that are ultimately broken. And they are experiencing a time right now under this Trump presidency which feels to them like a lot of the most nightmarish elements of American history that they have lived through. So what we're trying to do right now, a lot of these folks, my parents' age and older, are trying to get out of this immediate moment, and they deem Joe Biden as the best way to do that. That doesn't make folks the establishment. So I think Bernie has to be very, very careful with the messaging on that, because it's frankly insulting.
Okay. Elena Beverly, Don Calloway, you guys, thank you so much for that great discussion. Appreciated all this breaking news. Alex.